written, as far as I'm aware, where it tallies it up. Many developed countries have already expressed a preference for using their bilateral and multilateral channels. Indeed, they've already allocated funds. The UK, for example, has allocated funds through its Department for International Development. Countries have given funds already to the World Bank, to the Asian Development Bank. So funds are flowing through some existing channels and are being counted by the Annex I countries towards their commitment to Copenhagen. The question of how much of the money is being double counted with respect to meeting the Copenhagen Accord climate change finance with respect to overseas development assistance is very clearly that it is being double counted. But it's being double counted in various ways. Each country is using its own basis for counting money that it has given and in fact announced pre-Copenhagen as part of their Copenhagen commitment that comes out of their development assistance budgets. There's no agreed formula as to how much would be allowed, how much should there be double counting at all, and if so, how much. Again, this is an issue that the developed countries are going to have to sort out, at least amongst themselves, and then get the agreement of the developing countries if they want to get clarity. And my final point, as I said earlier, is that these things need to be sorted out in Cancun. The reason I say that is that the $30 billion that was offered and put on the table at the last minute or the last night in Copenhagen is actually not an insubstantial sum. Let us take the adaptation component of that. If balance means half, and we're talking about in the order of $15 billion over 3 years or $5 billion a year, that's not an insubstantial amount of money for adaptation. Certainly a lot more money than adaptation has received in the past, where in the past it's been in the order of tens, maybe in the low hundreds of millions. So that's an increase by orders of magnitude, which is significant. On the other hand, in the manner of giving it, the countries that are going to be making these contributions can in fact dissipate the goodwill that this amount of money should buy them by not giving it in a manner that is acceptable to the developing countries. Developing countries will receive the money, as we saw in the spaghetti diagram. Anybody flies in with a check, they'll say, yes, give us the money, we'll do something with it. But that isn't the way in which you buy goodwill in the negotiations. In the negotiations, developing countries have put forward certain views expressed as to which channels they prefer, namely through the UNFCCC. They want it to be accountable, measurable. They don't want cherry picking of which countries get the money from whom. And if the developed countries continue to act as if this is their money to give as they wish, and beggars cannot be choosers, then they will be very, very surprised, because these beggars are going to end up being choosers. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So have you found it thought-provoking? Because I did, I think. And I think we just continue along this line with our distinguished panel members. I would like to ask them to take 5 minutes very precisely in order to allow good time for question debates. And please, Thomas, if you could take the floor.
Thank you very much, Gabor. I am particularly pleased you showed a slide with the topic of spaghetti. I like to think of myself as a particularly good cook. And my wife is always telling me that actually this is not the case, and I refuse to believe her. But slowly I noticed that my girth was expanding and my health was deteriorating. And I worked out, with the help of my wife, that quantity does not always equal quality. And the purpose of my presentation here today is to talk about the quality of finance, not the quantity. I have specifically been engaged with a meeting over the last 2 days, which was titled the Asia-Pacific Aid Effectiveness and Climate Change Finance Dialogue. And this was a meeting that arose, or at least the demand for this meeting arose earlier this year in 2 different locations. One in Korea, where planning and finance officials from governments in the region met and asked themselves the question of why is it that we don't seem to be engaging in the debate around climate change finance? Why is it that 60 years of ODA management experience doesn't seem to be feeding in to the discussions of climate change finance? There was a demand then to discuss and analyze this issue more. Likewise, in Malawi in March of this year, a meeting of primarily environmental policymakers and practitioners met and asked themselves the question of what is it that we could do with existing country systems around public financial management and planning? What is it we can do with these systems to channel climate change finance? So two different groups, the environment group and the ODA management group, both of them converging around the issue of the quality of climate change finance. So over the last 2 days, we have supported a meeting amongst 7 different countries of the Asia Pacific, including finance, planning, Climate Change Commission, Ministry of Environment, National Assembly, civil society, development partners, all to come together and discuss the issue of how can we learn from ODA management and apply lessons to climate change finance. And just to share a few of those recommendations that came out in my last 3 minutes, Gabor. This is what came out of the meeting, and I share these recommendations, knowing that there are several in this room who were also at those meetings, both on the panel and on the floor. This is what was said. Climate change presents an exceptional challenge, but we should use the knowledge, guidance, and tools of what works in external financing. The Paris Declaration's targets and indicators for the management of ODA provide some fundamental benchmarks around which the quality of external sources of publicly provided climate change finance can be assessed. This should not constrain innovation around climate change financing, and climate change financing will inform ODA management discussions just as much as ODA management should inform climate change management discussions. But a practical and transparent debate should take place around the quality issues of climate change finance. There were then a number of recommendations that were made at different levels: country level, government level, development partner level, both in country and at the international level. At the country level, countries should strengthen and broaden political leadership around the climate change agenda. The agenda is not yet embedded in all countries of the region. Countries need to strengthen their policy and budgeting frameworks so that external sources of finance can align behind them. Without clear national priorities and policy frameworks, without clear domestic funding frameworks, it's not possible to align external sources of climate change finance. Very importantly, mechanisms for monitoring and tracking resources are needed at the country level. It's not possible at the moment to say how much climate change finance is available at the country level. But there are databases around financial management and ODA tracking that can be used, and they should be. Governments, recommendations around governments. Specifically, governments should strengthen their capacity for the management of climate change across government, clarifying roles and responsibilities and ensuring a common approach to external funding. A common concern in ODA management is different ministries have different approaches to how they profile loans vis-à-vis grants, whether they'll accept policy-based lending or not, how they manage technical assistance. And yet many countries have established aid policies which provide instruments which could be used for strengthening the management of climate change finance at the country level. Just 2 more sets of recommendations. International funders globally should increase the volume of funding, especially for adaptation, and clarify with countries what is new money based on a common definition. But importantly, related to quantity, is predictability. Countries cannot plan for the future without having predictable sources of finance in multi-year frameworks. We need to move from pledges to funding and ensure timely disbursements. Finally, at the international level, those involved in the provision of climate change finance should simplify both the sources and the processes for accessing finance. And wherever possible, they should delegate responsibility to country-level delegations and offices for decision-making around the provision of climate change finance. Finally, just as a couple of next steps in the last 15 seconds, it was recognized that because of this diverse group, there were a number of international policy processes that should be used to take this agenda forward. Both the high-level Forum on Aid Effectiveness in Korea in 2011, as well as the COP process, including Cancun at the end of this year. Thank you for letting me share those recommendations from the meeting, which is hot off the press as it finished yesterday late afternoon. Thank you.
Well, I think it was sizzling, just like the food on your kitchen, on your stove when you cook. We could tell that. Thanks a lot, and we all realized it was just scratching the surface on a very complex set of recommendations. But indeed, thanks a lot. I will take the order of the what we discussed through the email. So I would like to call on Tamara for more. No, hang on.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, sorry. And she also has some figures to show us.
Thank you. First and foremost, I should say, as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, we have a mandate to do a lot of work in climate change and to support the negotiations. It's not our mandate to say whether donors are living up to their commitments on Fast Start finance. So we can provide some basic information, and please note that we have a mandate not to interfere in the negotiations, and there won't be any ruling specifically, although Salim would like to put us on the spot about whether donors are living up to their commitments. Salim has mentioned that there was the Copenhagen commitment for Fast Start financing between 2010 and 2012 of 30 billion. This is 10 billion a year, and it is balanced between adaptation and mitigation. And it's been very clear that balance does not necessarily mean equal. There's also the long-term financing goal of mobilizing 100 billion a year by 2020, much of this from the private sector. There was also a commitment to set up a Copenhagen Green Climate Fund and a high-level panel with 2 working groups, one studying public finance, one studying private finance. In terms of the commitments made to date on Fast Start finance, there have been a number of different analyses with slightly different numbers. The European Climate Foundation has a project called Project Catalyst, which has about a USD $28 billion figure. When you actually deduct the grant equivalency element, we're at about 25 billion. WRI also calculates about 28 billion. They say 27.9. Clearly, the 4 billion has been allocated to the RED Plus partnership. What you'll notice on this slide is that for 2010 and 2011, the commitments are slightly higher. For 2010, based on WRI commitments, and calculations, I'd urge you to look at their webpage because it does look at every single country and the commitments they've made to date. But 2010 is 10.25 billion, 2011 9.78 billion. 2012 suddenly goes down to 7.88 billion, and this is because many countries have not actually produced their budget for 2012. So the projections from a range of organizations is that by 2012, actually, Fast Start financing will be between 32 and 35 billion. And this is actually quite significant given that we've been in a fiscally constrained environment post the economic crisis, that actually the figures being committed exceed the Fast Start commitments. And it does say how important climate change finance is. How do we assess the pledges? Again, Salim has highlighted this balance between mitigation and adaptation, and as well, which countries are selected. Do we prioritize the least developed countries? Which channels are used? Are they existing funds, bilateral, multilateral, or this new green fund? And how do we determine new and additional? In terms of balanced allocation, if we look at the EU in 2010, 63% has gone to mitigation and 37% to adaptation. Similarly, Denmark, 52% has gone to mitigation and 48% to adaptation and capacity building. This doesn't account for the fact that there are often mitigation and adaptation synergies, but there is, to date, a balance on low carbon growth and mitigation. New and additional is a very, very controversial issue, and it remains, as Salim pointed out, to be discussed in the negotiations. It is also being discussed